Good evening, everyone, and thank you for your attendance to this webinar. For those who don't know me, my name is Benji Jotkowitz. I'm the president of Mizrachi in Melbourne. Just wanted to say thank you to Gary Hertz for facilitating this webinar this evening. Gary reached out to me as a member of Mizrachi last week for the association with the Jerusalem Institute for Strategy and Security. A number of you would remember Professor Ephraim Inbar, who visits our shores frequently, and made the introduction for our guest speaker this evening, who is the Vice President of the Jerusalem Institute for Strategy and Security, Colonel Dr. Eran Lerman. Just by way of introduction, Dr. Lerman was Deputy Director for Foreign Policy and International Affairs at the National Security Council in the Israeli Prime Minister's office. He had senior positions in IDF military intelligence for over 20 years. He's also served for 8 years as director of the Israel and Middle East office of the American Jewish Committee.
In which capacity I visited Melbourne in my day.
He teaches in the Middle East Studies program at Shalem College in Jerusalem and in postgraduate programs at Tel Aviv University and the National Defense College. He's an expert on Israel's foreign relations and on the Middle East, third-generation Sabra. He holds a PhD from the London School of Economics and a mid-career MPA from Harvard University. Dr. Lerman's topic for this evening is why Hamas must be undone and what comes next. He'll present to us for, I think, around 20-25 minutes or so. And then if you're okay with that, we were going to open it up to some Q&A. It is a webinar, so therefore, if you do have those questions, if you can pop them in the chat or the Q&A box, and we'll take a few of those and see how we go for time, and then Gary will wrap up the session. So over to you, Dr. Lerman.
Thank you, Benjamin. It's good to be in Melbourne, even only in the spirit. Why Hamas must be undone? Because we woke up on the 7th of October quite brutally from the illusion or the hope or the conception that many of us shared, frankly, that given our deterrent capacity and given our military might and given the assumption that there are rational people on the other side who will understand the consequences of a major attack on Israel, we can somehow establish an unpleasant but workable modus vivendi in which the Hamas was turning slowly into a protection racket, drawing money from Hamas, extorting concessions from Israel on economic matter, employment in Israel. All of this was something that they actually led us to believe by their own conduct. They actually set out 2 rounds with Palestinian Islamic Jihad, in which we hammered their little sister organization, and they stayed out. And all of this fed the assumption that somehow over time they could be, how shall I put it carefully, tamed or domesticated, despite their basic identity as a Nazi-oriented organization, Islamist, but also colored by a very specific perception of history. I would urge you to have a look at your free time at the original Hamas covenant of 1988, which if you look, for example, at chapter 22 of the Hamas covenant, what you find is purely the Nazi interpretation of history as dispensed by the Mufti's radio station near Berlin, Radio Zaysen, and its relay station in Italy, Radio Bari, in Arabic to many people around the region during the war years, and fed them on a very nasty diet of the Nazi conspiracy explanation of everything that happened from the French Revolution onwards. And Hamas picked it up, and basically this is the template of history, and this is where they come from. So when we compare them to the Nazis, when President Joe Biden and others other leaders in the world compared them to the Nazis. This was not just an expression of our horror, it is an expression of our understanding of their ideology, where they come from. Islamist totalitarianism, as distinct from Islam as a religion, has always been tainted by this hybrid nature of its basically combination of elements of religion with the operational templates and the historical interpretations of modern Nazism and modern totalitarianism. And so we woke up to the realization that they have not been tamed, and that it's not just a barbarous attack, it's a Nazi-oriented action. Having said so, I, for one, thought it was a mistake for our ambassador at the UN to show up with the yellow star, for the simple reason that in this round of war with a Nazi-like organization, we are no longer the Jews of Europe being hunted. We are, if you wish, Britain in 1940, besieged but determined to fight, maimed but standing powerful and proud and capable of striking back, which is what we're doing. The IDF has picked up from a momentous failure, and nobody can deny that in addition to the problems that will have to be investigated at the highest level of government, the IDF as an organization failed to deliver on its most basic mission of protecting our citizens on the 7th of October. But they have recovered personally and organizationally, the commanders in the south and the IDF high command and the organization as such have recovered in a remarkable way, uplifted by the spirit of the Israeli people. Perhaps one of the most significant aspects of what happened is that the rate of reporting for duty for people called up in the combat units that are scheduled to fight in the south, are fighting in the south and may need to fight in the north, was in many cases closer to 200 than to 100%. That is to say, for everyone called up, another person after his years or her years of duty showed up demanding to be taken in. This is why there were some equipment shortages here and there, because more people were clamoring to be asked to be taken in to fight. I know a friend of mine who came back from fighting in Ukraine and insisted that his old, despite a wound that disqualified him, insisted that the paratroopers take him in. So this is how we are now in a position to encircle the Gaza city. Our divisions are closing in on the Hamas strongholds from every direction. In military terms, the situation is that Gaza has been carved into two very distinct areas, as I wrote for JISS. In the south, there's a space for the people who evacuated themselves from the north, where there's some humanitarian aid being brought in. It may anger a lot of Israelis to see humanitarian support going into Gaza while there's no word of our hostages, but it actually serves the IDF military operational needs, because the more the uninvolved, so to speak, the civilian population, the more they clear out of the northern segment where we are fighting now, the easier it is to close in on the Hamas cadres and leadership and infrastructure and the tunnel system and destroy them. And this is what is being done. Whether we shall have to fight again in the south, where perhaps already some of the Hamas leadership may have left their troops behind and taken refuge there, or whether some other provisions will be made for the surrender of the remaining Hamas combatants and a reorganization of this area remains to be seen, because we are basically decapitating Hamas as an organization, as a de facto government in Gaza, and destroying it in the north. And then we shall see whether we need to repeat this procedure in the reverse order, letting some of the population go north and then going south to destroy the remnants of the Hamas fighting capacity, or whether we shall find another way to achieve the same goal. But the purpose is clear and actually supported. My jaw dropped, I have to say, a few days ago. Even Bernie Sanders understands that there is no future for our region if Hamas is not undone. So across the board, this is supported. Of course, we have the very loud and ugly minority demonstrating against Israel all over the West. There was apparently a Jewish demonstrator murdered, or victim of homicide, to use precise language, in California the other day. And there are ugly scenes in the streets and ugly scenes on campus. But if you look at the stance of the key international leaders, and above all, of course, President Joe Biden and the American administration, the American Defense Department, their deployment, their support, they understand that a ceasefire that leaves Hamas in power in parts of Gaza is a recipe for catastrophe. So a ceasefire is essentially off the table. The question is, will there be what they call humanitarian pauses? And here it is the opinion of Israelis, basically across the board, that this should be made conditional on the release, or at least progress towards the release, of our hostages, men, women, babies, children, the elderly, and in the same breath also the soldiers and the young people who were taken from the bases, from the party in Re'im. This is must be a demand that and a precondition for any relief in the military pressure. And ultimately, we must renew the effort until Hamas is undone. And we have to start thinking seriously about how we what way to reconfigure Gaza, so it can never again serve as a basis for anything like what we saw. Here opinions vary in Israel as to what needs to be done. I have to be frank, there are Israelis who fantasize, dream, express themselves about, eradicating Gaza, throwing the Gazans into Sinai. One of our ministers spoke even in an even less, shall I be frank, intelligent way about what can or should be done. Basically, these are fantasies. Gaza is not going to be obliterated, and the Egyptians will not accept hundreds of thousands or more into their territory. And the whole idea of an international flotilla showing up and taking them to Canada and Australia, not that I would recommend this to Australians, is in the realm of let's say gut anger and fantasy. It's not going to happen. But we do need to make sure that first of all, the Palestinian Authority, as currently configured, is not tasked with this mission for if only leaving aside the Israeli concerns, their ideology about Israel, their failure to negotiate in good faith, all of these things, but simply because they are totally incapable of doing it. And the result will be the resurgence very quickly of the same kind of terrorist infrastructure that Israel is helping them destroy day in, day out, mostly night in and night out in Judea and Samaria. That's not what we would be buying into or should be buying into. And it's not a situation in which the people of Sderot and the people of the Kibbutzim and Moshavim and Be'eri and Kfar Aza and Nahal Oz and Nir Oz and others who have been devastated, they will not go back to live there unless there is a very different security situation, very different political proposition in Gaza. I would also steer clear of the United Nations Security Council and its authority. First of all, because you need to go only as far as the statements of Secretary General Guterres to realize that we have a problem. And moreover, our lessons of history. For example, UN Security Council Resolution 1701 in Lebanon in 2006 teach us that these things don't work. It was never implemented properly. Hezbollah now has 10 times as many or more than 10 times as many rockets aimed at Israel and the full control of southern Lebanon, all of which was not supposed to happen under this UN resolution. There are 15,000 UN troops which do not dare to take any action. So we need a very different source of authority for any future presence that would hopefully at some point replace the need for the IDF to stay on the ground, which basically is not what the government wants in the long run. It may be necessary for a very long run, but it is not what we ultimately want to see. So there will need to be some kind of alternative source of authority, multinational, not international in the UN sense. And this is something to be discussed and negotiated mainly between us and the Americans in the coming days and weeks. Israel should certainly be more proactive, I believe, in raising its own ideas and its own requirements in this conversation. A few more words about the broader implications. Regionally, the American posture and Israel's very rapid mobilization have deterred Hezbollah and the Iranians from going all in. There is a fighting going on in the north. It's a kind of mid-intensity warfare. We've lost the lives of several soldiers and 2 civilians so far. Tens of thousands have been evacuated from Kiryat Shmona and the areas adjacent to the border. There's a very serious question as to whether or not we would have to expand the military operations to the north at some point in order to let them come back safely with a sense of security to the border area, given what happened on the 7th of October. But so far, the Iranians were pushing their proxies to throw in their weight. Militias in Syria and Iraq attacking the Americans, the Houthi usurper regime in Sana'a in Yemen firing long-range missiles at Israel, unsuccessfully, I should note, Arrow 2 and the Air Force and the Americans. And I would even mention the Saudis have foiled these attacks so far. But at the end of the day, Iran itself has managed to convey that they will stay out. And Hassan Nasrallah is kind of 1 foot in, 1 foot out. And for the time being, it suits us because we need to concentrate on the mission at hand in Gaza. What is a long-term lesson, and here again I point to the American position, which increasingly recognizes this, but needs also to start thinking about the consequences of this recognition. what we are seeing is that Iran, Russia, and unfortunately China are lining up as a bloc in support of Hamas in the diplomatic arena and in the war of ideas, the war of words that is engulfing the world, the massive wave of anti-Semitic propaganda. Historically, we're not used to thinking of China and anti-Semitism in the same sentence, but what we are seeing now in the officially condoned social media there is horrifying, and it's something for all, certainly for you in your neighborhood, to take note of. It is a very worrisome aspect. If I look at India, on the other hand, it has taken a remarkably, I would say pro-Israeli, but maybe modified, but certainly avoided taking an anti-Israeli position, abstained at the UN General Assembly, and there were statements from Modi which indicated understanding and even solidarity. And so this war is also revealing a new international landscape, which flows from the war in Ukraine, links up with what's happened with Hamas and Iran and the Russian connection, and may take us further around the globe, I fear, looking down the road. Okay, at this point, let's open this to questions.
I'll jump in here. There are a couple, so I'll read them out to you. Firstly, if Hamas is defeated and disbanded, Israel will be the occupying power and responsible for administration of Gaza. I understand the government is not providing strategic guidance or planning.
Well, as I said, this would be a transitional phase, obviously, because the IDF will be there and will not withdraw and leave a void behind. But there is, I believe, a conversation already going on mainly with our American partners. I would almost call it allies, or this is a hybrid alliance. They don't fight shoulder to shoulder with us, but they are present in the case that someone else comes in. It really reminds me of the text of typical text of treaties of alliance from the 19th century. If you fight alone, we'll stay out. But if you fight two enemies, we will come in and support you. This is essentially what the Americans have done, and we need to take their positions and their concerns into account. And they have to understand our perspective, and they do, basically. And we have a conversation with them about how to put together an alternative reality in Gaza after the Hamas is destroyed. There are many in Washington who are still wedded to the Palestinian Authority as the solution, but that's simply not going to work, as I said. So we're working on the government is beginning to become more coherent about what could be and should be done.
Benji, I'll ask a question. You spoke about destroying Hamas. We've got the military wing of Hamas, and we've got this civil infrastructure. We've got the social welfare part of Hamas. Could you discuss those two aspects of it to divide them up, and what would happen? You know, you destroy the military, which I assume will be the top echelons. Hamas is about 40,000 terrorist fighters. Would you discuss that aspect of it also in relation to destroying Hamas?
Well, the language of the government, the Israeli High Command, Minister of Defense, Gallant, and others are using is very simple: either surrender. And I assume that those who were not directly involved in the butchery would be treated differently than those who would stand trial, and Israel may have to take some very extreme measures about people who butchered children. But the soldiers, the fighters, so to speak, the troops, would be destroyed or forced into surrender. As for their infrastructure as a government, it already has basically evaporated in much of Gaza and will continue to do so in the south as well. Their political leadership is their military leadership. We don't distinguish. And they would be undone. There's a challenge with those who are outside the country, those who are basically in Qatar, in Beirut. Some have been coming and going out of Turkey. Sooner or later, I think we are going to settle all of these accounts. And also sooner or later, Qatar is going to have to answer to the international community about hosting this kind of organization. Right now, we need their help in trying to negotiate a solution to our hostage situation, in which they've positioned themselves as a vital link, also to cover for their own the challenges that they are going to face. But the leadership, the political and the administrative and the military control of Hamas in Gaza will be completely taken down.
I'll just continue. I don't know how many questions you've got, but if I may, well,
Yes.
Yes. Who feels jihad? Where do they fit in? Israel's not just saying, you're Hamas, we're going to kill you. There's Islamic Jihad. What role are they playing? They're much smaller. And the other terrorists.
Well, frankly, the language is constantly about Hamas, but we mean Hamas and PIJ, Palestinian Islamic Jihad. Basically, the smaller sister that participated in the butchery participates in the rocket launches, and they would be destroyed along with Hamas. There's no distinction in terms of our policy here.
Okay, there's a couple more, and we're short for time. Do you anticipate that after the Gaza campaign that Israel will then deal with the Iranian nuclear threat in more concrete way?
It would probably need to, and the international community should reconsider its position. Iran is sending its proxies to kill Americans right now. Iran is very much complicit in creating the conditions, if not giving the order, for what happened. And the entire strategy built on finding some kind of a common language with Iran has collapsed, perhaps even before the 7th of October. I don't want to go into the complexities of the story, but the chief American negotiator was suspended in suspicion of actually being complicit with the Iranians in one way or the other. The whole story has taken a nasty turn, and therefore we hope, we cannot be sure, that the alliance now struck between us and the Americans is a two-way street. They ask us to take their deepest concerns into consideration, and we are doing this as best we can. But they need also to understand that their entire paradigm about Iran has been proven false, much the same as our paradigm about Hamas. And there are certain consequences that flow from that.
Okay, there's a couple more, if you're happy to take a few more questions.
Okay.
How should Israel respond to Yemen's declaration of war?
Yemen, no, it's not Yemen, it's the Houthi regime in Sana'a. There's another Yemen on the other side of the divide. But the Houthis, by the way, are the only de facto government in the world that openly declares, not even Hamas says so in their banners say that the Jews must be destroyed. But that's a central tenet of the Houthi regime. Right now, we have other things to do, but Israel may find ways to exact a price down the road from this government, from this organization. If the war in Yemen reignites as a result, our newly found Saudi partner may find us more willing than ever to be of help. And if not, the Houthis will need to be denied some of their capabilities, and it's not beyond the capacity of Israel to do something in that respect, either by air, by sea, or via our Mossad operations. We will not leave this account unsettled, but we have other priorities right now.
Okay. Seems that Hamas's ideology is very popular in Muslim communities all over the world. Can we destroy this? And especially if the head of this cancer is in Qatar and Iran continue?
Let's distinguish between the Qataris who have been hosting this and the Iranians who are, let's say, the strategic sponsors. But Qatar can be intimidated. I believe it's a small country. It needs the Americans. It is desperate for world recognition. You saw they invested in the World Cup, by the way, successfully, I should say, in their time, in order to legitimize themselves. This legitimacy must be denied them unless they, first of all, succeed in solving the hostage situation, and secondly, divest themselves of the presence of Hamas down the road. As for Muslim communities, I have to say, I work with Muslims who have a very different opinion. I happen to be the editor-in-chief of a magazine whose publisher is a Moroccan Muslim friend of Israel, may be known to some of you, Ahmed Shar'i, whose first reaction is to ask us to post, and you can see it on our JS Tribune website, an essay under the title, "We Are All Israelis," and insisting on telling the world that the horrors that took place do not represent Islam as a religion. And we should be very adamant about making that point. Hamas violates the basic tenets of Islam. It is not representative of Islam. And you hear these voices in the Muslim world, but at the same time, yes, it's true, radicalism linked up with idiotic left-wing support. I can hardly understand how these butchers of women and children and people who execute gays can be the darlings of idiots in the Western left. But it's an old Greek saying that against stupidity the gods themselves contend in vain. But this combination needs to be fought, and quite frankly, the best way to eradicate support for such a phenomenon is to destroy Hamas and teach their supporters a lesson. And Nazism became distinctly less popular worldwide after 1945.
Okay, do you want one more question, or are we out of time?
I can take any question, any number of questions.
There's a range here, but I'll keep going. Given the government's failure to anticipate and quickly respond to the war, how do you see the political fate of the PM?
Frankly, I think we are in for a change of leadership after the war, the same way as it's happened after 1973. The sheer responsibility for failure on this magnitude, which would, I believe, lead also to the resignation of the entire command structure of the IDF and the Shin Bet, the day after, while they're doing their gallant best right now. cannot happen without a parallel shift in the political landscape. I hope against hope, I hope against precedent in Jewish history, that we shall have unifying leadership after that will heal the wounds of the previous period of internal rifts, and would unite us around a long-term project of, first of all, rebuilding our military force to a much higher degree, investing much more in our security and in our, let's say, both coherence and resilience, and bringing the majority of Israelis together, and that's going to be a major challenge. It's not. This is what the people want. You hear this, you see this in every act of every voluntary effort that is made to support each other in this war, in the spirit of showing up for duty, picking up tomatoes in the abandoned fields in the south. Wherever you look, you see this. It needs to be translated into a new political charter.
Okay, thank you very much. Gary, over to you to conclude. Just need to unmute yourself.
Thanks, Benji. Thanks very much, Eran, for your optimistic view in relation to Hamas and the destruction of Hamas. It's good to hear that from an expert in the area. And I was reading an article yesterday in the Jerusalem Post by Marjan Hoffman, and she spoke about 5 challenges that faces Israel after the Shloshim, after the 30 days. And they were all very sobering. You have dealt with one of them, and Israel being embroiled with Hamas, and ultimately Israel will be successful in destroying them. The other heads were diplomatic support is weakening, anti-Semitism is rife. There's 1,200% increase in online calls for violence against Israel and Zionists and Jews. The country is experiencing collective trauma, economic recession. Israel faces economic recession. All those are a webinar session on their own. And Eran, being from GIST, the Jerusalem Institute of Strategy and Security, if you have a look at their website, they have unbelievably good speakers and experts in their areas, all which would cover these topics. So when I contacted Ephraim Imbar, the president of GIS, last week, and I said, could we have Eran speak to us? And he contacted Eran, and Eran immediately accepted, as GIS people do. And one of the reasons that they're so cooperative in giving of themselves to speak at short notice is that Ephraim's connection with Australia, and as Benji mentioned, he's been there a few times, and he's spoken to the Mizrachi Kahila on a number of occasions. And Professor Imbar is an expert in his own right, and his connection to Australia includes 2 people from Australia on the board of GIS, being Greg Ross-Handler and Danny Lamb, both who are on tonight. So we thank very much Ephraim for...
Gary, one little thing. We say JISS. I was in the embarrassing position of being told by my 94-year-old mother that JIS is actually used in parts of New York as a very unpleasant slang word for something that I cannot repeat online. So let's just keep it at JISS.
Yeah, thank you, Eran, for that. We're here in Melbourne, Australia, but thank you for that point of information. may I thank all the viewers, the listeners tonight. They should take time out and look at really JISS's website. It really is phenomenal. And I'll just give you two other examples of speakers that they have. And one is Yaakov Amidror, Major General, who was a former National Security Advisor to Benjamin Netanyahu many years ago. And I underlined the word many years ago. And they have Uzi Reuben, who was founder of the Israel Missile Defense Organization in the Ministry of Defense. And he was the initiator of the missile defense program, defense system for Israel, including the Arrow, which is now being used. So thank you, Eran. Thank you for the listeners. And thank you for Benji, the president, for taking this on. And we bid everyone a good night.
Good evening to you, and keep safe, and we need your support.
Amen.
Thank you.
Thank you.